There comes a point in life where care is no longer enough. Good intentions are not enough. Potential's not enough. Warmth's not enough. Even creativity's not enough. At some point, something has to be held, protected, defined, organized, and boundaried. It needs to be made stable enough to survive contact with the real world. This is the territory of the emperor. And although the emperor is often associated with power, authority, leadership, and control, the deeper developmental lesson is much more interesting than that. The emperor represents our capacity to create structure strong enough to support the life that we choose. We're saying this matters, this has boundaries. I take responsibility for this. It has standards and direction. This is what I will allow, and this is what I will not allow. The Empress has given life nourishment. The Emperor now gives life form. A worthwhile life needs both to ensure stability. Welcome back to Tarot Major Arcana. This is the fifth video in our sequential journey through all 22 major arcana as living pathways of personal, emotional, psychological, and spiritual development. This is where we meet the Emperor. The Emperor represents structure, authority, order, boundary, and form. And this is one of the most important archetypes to understand properly because people often confuse healthy authority with control. They're not the same thing. Healthy emperor energy creates structure. Shadow emperor energy tries to control everything inside that structure. This distortion matters enormously. The developmental sequence here is beautifully logical. The Empress nourishes life, but anything that grows eventually needs form. Imagine a garden. The Empress is the fertile soil, water, sunlight, cultivation, and growth. The Emperor is the fence, the borders, the layout, the pergola, and the pathway. This is the structure that helps us appreciate the beauty and stops everything from becoming chaotic. A child needs love, warmth, and emotional attunement, but a child also needs limits, routine, predictability, and safety. A creative idea needs imagination, but eventually it needs deadlines, decisions, editing, and completion. A relationship needs affection, but it also needs boundaries. The Emperor therefore asks, what structure does this need in order to stand and be maintained? This is the core developmental function of the Emperor. One of the most common modern misunderstandings is the idea that structure limits freedom. Sometimes it does, but healthy structure often creates freedom. Think about music. A musician develops freedom through learning structure, scales, timing, and technique. Without structure, energy can leak and attention can be scattered. People can become overwhelmed by possibilities. And good intentions then struggle to become stable outcomes. The Emperor understands that freedom without structure can become chaos. The structure without freedom can become tyranny. The mature task is, as always, balance. Authority is central to this archetype, but authority is often emotionally loaded. For some people, authority means safety. For others, it means oppression. For some, it may mean responsibility, but for others, it may mean fear. That relationship and meaning often begins in our childhood. What did authority feel like in your family? Was it consistent, fair, and protective? Or was it more harsh, controlling, and unpredictable? These experiences can profoundly shape how we later relate to authority in ourselves and in others. Someone raised around harsh authority may reject all structure. Another may reproduce the same harshness as they deal with others. Someone raised without reliable authority may become desperate for external certainty. Another may decide they can depend on nobody and must control absolutely everything themselves. The Emperor therefore asks not only how do you respond to authority, but how do you embody authority within yourself? The healthiest expression of Emperor energy begins internally. Before we speak about leading others, we need to speak about self-command. Can you keep a promise to yourself? Can you tolerate temporary discomfort in service of something that's important to you? Can you say no when something crosses a boundary? Can you make a decision and stand by it? Can you create routines that support what you value? And can you take responsibility without collapsing into self-criticism? This is self-command alongside clear boundaries and a grounded authority in healthy emperor energy. And this is important because someone can appear powerful externally whilst having very little internal command. They may dominate others because they can't regulate themselves. This is not mature emperor energy, this is overcompensation. At its healthiest, the emperor gives us structure, boundary, responsibility, grounded authority, and stability. A healthy emperor can say, this is what I stand for. This is what I'm responsible for. This is the standard I expect. And importantly, the healthy emperor doesn't need to become cruel in order to be clear. Clarity is not aggression. Boundaries are not rejection. True leadership is never domination. The mature emperor can remain firm without becoming rigid. He understands the difference between holding a line and trying to control other people. Boundaries are one of the clearest ways emperor energy appears in your everyday life. A boundary should never be an attempt to control another person. It defines what you will do in response to what happens. For example, you're not allowed to ever speak to me like that. Sounds like control. A more grounded boundary might be, if this conversation becomes abusive, I will end it and we can return to it when we're both calmer and willing to be respectful. That's a very different and more effective approach. I'm sure you'd agree. The boundary defines your participation. Healthy emperor energy says, I know where I end and where you begin. Without that, relationships can become confusing. People overgive, resentment accumulates, and responsibility can become blurred to a point where someone feels invaded, abandoned, or exhausted. Many people know intellectually that they need boundaries, but emotionally, boundaries can feel a bit dangerous. Saying no might mean they'll get angry, they'll stop liking me, they'll judge me, I'll disappoint them. This is not a lack of boundary knowledge, it's a fear of consequences of self-definition. This is very emperor-like, because healthy authority requires the willingness to tolerate another person's disappointment. Not cruelly, not unnecessarily, but clearly and when required. If your only acceptable boundaries are ones that nobody dislikes, it's not really boundaries. It's more a request for universal approval. Oh, and I've just recently published a comprehensive book where I go into all the transformational details of each of the 22 archetypes and their healthy, blocked, and shadow aspects. I explain exactly how to recognize them, what they mean, and the positive, insightful power you can access through them. The book's called the Tarot Major Arcana. You can get it on Amazon, and I'll put a link to it in the description below this video. Now, let's look at the blocked emperor, which can show up as weak boundaries, lack of structure, and collapse under responsibility. This can be a difficulty in saying no, chronic disorganisation, avoiding decisions and letting other people determine your direction. It can be procrastination around responsibility, maybe start things without creating systems to sustain them, or perhaps looking to others to provide certainty. The blocked emperor may say, I don't want conflict. I don't want to appear controlling. I'd prefer to just go with the flow. But sometimes going with the flow is not freedom, it's avoidance of self-definition. There is an interesting psychological point here. People often experience structure as restrictive, but a complete lack of structure can create enormous anxiety. If nothing is defined, then what am I responsible for? What will happen next? What are the expectations? Where is the limit and who decides? The nervous system has to keep scanning because predictability matters. This is why healthy routines can be regulating, why clear agreements help relationships, why children often feel safer with consistent boundaries, why teams perform better when responsibilities are clear. Structure reduces ineffective uncertainty. The emperor provides a container, and a good container supports and protects what's inside of it. Then we come to the opposite distortion. If the blocked emperor struggles to hold structure, the shadow emperor tries to hold way too much. This appears as rigidity, domination, harshness, and control. Here, the need for stability can become fear-driven. The person endlessly tries to control things like people, outcomes, timing, emotions, and the flow of information and uncertainty itself. They may tell themselves, I'm just being responsible. But underneath that, there may be a fear if I lose control, something bad will happen. If I don't manage everyone, they'll possibly fail. If I don't stay strong, everything will collapse around me. If I let someone disagree, I will lose their respect. This is not grounded authority, it's threatened authority, which is perhaps one of the most important ideas within the Emperor. Control often appears powerful, but psychologically, excessive control frequently hides fear. Fear of unpredictability, fear of dependency, fear of vulnerability, fear of being wrong, or fear of losing status. So the Shadow Emperor doesn't necessarily need less power. They need a safer relationship with uncertainty. The person who controls every detail may not trust other people, but perhaps they also don't trust themselves to cope if something goes wrong. And that points to a far deeper issue. The question becomes, what am I trying to prevent through control? This question opens up all sorts of hidden shadow behavior very quickly. The Emperor is also deeply connected with the archetypal father principle, not simply the literal father, but the psychological function associated with it. Structure, protection, boundaries, and discipline. Our relationship with fathering can influence how Emperor energy develops. A healthy father principle says, I believe you're capable, and I will help and support you develop the strength to stand on your own. A shadow father principle may say, you will obey because I am stronger. A blocked father principle may be absent altogether. Then the person may grow up without a strong internal sense of limits, authority, self-discipline, or confidence in making decisions. Again, this is not about blaming parents. It's about recognizing developmental patterns. In relationships, emperor energy is essential. Without it, there may be affection, but there'll be no stability. Love, but no boundaries, or connection with no clarity. Healthy emperor energy helps partners define, what do we agree on? What matters to us? What behavior is acceptable? What are each of our responsibilities? What happens when something goes wrong? These questions answered well create safety, dependability, and predictability. But shadow emperor energy creates domination, where one partner becomes the authority, the other becomes the subordinate. Decision making becomes unilateral. Certain emotions are treated as weakness. This is where control replaces collaboration. This is where the archetype becomes distorted. The mature emperor doesn't need obedience, he needs integrity. This archetype is also especially visible in leadership. Healthy leadership creates clarity, direction, accountability, structure, and psychological safety through consistency. People know where they stand, expectations are clear, standards are maintained, and the right decisions are made. But shadow leaders often confuse authority with control. They micromanage, they dominate decisions, they punish disagreement, they hoard information. They surround themselves with yes people and then wonder why initiative has disappeared. The blocked emperor creates chaos. The shadow emperor creates fear. The mature emperor creates structure strong enough for other people to function effectively inside of it. This gives us an important distinction: authority versus domination. Authority is recognized because it's grounded. Domination has to be enforced continually. A genuinely authoritative person doesn't need to prove their authority in every conversation. They can listen, change their mind, delegate, and are comfortable to admit when they're wrong or don't know, because their identity is not threatened by those things. The shadow emperor experiences flexibility as weakness. The mature emperor understands that strength includes adaptability. This is a very different quality of power and leadership. Responsibility is another very important central theme of the emperor. Blocked emperor energy avoids responsibility. Shadow emperor energy takes responsibility for everything. Neither is healthy in any way, shape, or form. The mature question is, what is actually mine to hold? Not what can I control or what can I rescue? They can recognize and acknowledge what genuinely belongs within their sphere of influence and responsibility, which very much includes understanding what doesn't belong there. Other people's feelings are not always yours to manage. Other people's choices are not always yours to fix. Other people's development is not always yours to accelerate. Responsibility becomes healthier when ownership becomes clearer. The Emperor also introduced what the personal development culture sometimes underplays, and that's discipline. Growth can't depend entirely on inspiration. There will be days when you don't feel motivated. The Emperor asks whether values can become structure. If health matters, what actions support it? If writing matters, when do you write and for how long? If a relationship matters, what behavior protects it and how do you demonstrate that it actually does matter? This is how the Emperor builds upon the magician. The magician directs will, the Emperor builds the structure that allows will to endure. But discipline can easily become shadowed. A person can create impossible or unrealistic standards. Rest becomes weakness, mistakes become failure, flexibility becomes laziness. They continually push and then call exhaustion discipline. This is not healthy Emperor energy. Healthy discipline serves development. Punitive discipline serves only fear. The question is, does this structure support me, and am I now serving the structure? The distinction matters. Rules are tools. When the rule becomes more important than the life it was designed to support, Emperor energy has become distorted. There's also a deep connection between boundaries and self-respect. Self-respect is not simply feeling positively about yourself. It appears in what you permit, what you repeatedly accept, what you refuse to negotiate away, where you stand firm even when doing so is uncomfortable. Sometimes a person says, I need more self-esteem, but the practical developmental task may be more emperor-like. A boundary needs to be expressed, a standard needs to be raised, a responsibility needs to be accepted, and a decision needs to be made. Self-respect becomes real through your actions and your behaviors. So how might you know if Emperor energy is especially active in your life right now? Perhaps life is asking you to create structure. Maybe things have become a bit chaotic, or you're being pushed in an unwanted direction and need to say no. Perhaps a responsibility you've avoided can no longer be avoided. And the problem is not lack of motivation, but lack of an effective system and strategy. In shadow, maybe you're controlling everything too tightly so that nothing can breathe, where routines have become rigid and those around you feel managed rather than related to. The Emperor can appear through both absence and excess. The question is, where does structure need to become healthier? If you do want to work with the Emperor as a developmental archetype, you can begin with these two questions. Where in your life is structure missing? And where are you perhaps overcompensating through control? Then you can also ask, where do you need clearer boundaries? What are you afraid will happen if you say no? Where are you avoiding responsibility? Where are you carrying responsibility that's simply not yours? What rules and standards currently support you? What rules might you have that are too rigid and don't support you at all? How do you react when someone challenges your authority? Do you lead through clarity or through fear? And perhaps most importantly of all, what structure would allow what matters to you to become more stable? You'll have recognized by now that this is a sequential evolution. So you'll realize that structure alone is not enough. Once we've created order, another question emerges. According to what values? Who taught us what's right? Which values have we inherited? What traditions shape us? Which beliefs are genuinely guiding us? And which ones have simply been handed to us and accepted without question? This is where we move into the next archetype, the Hierophant. The Emperor creates structure. The Hierophant asks what gives that structure meaning. The Emperor establishes order. The Hierophant introduces values, tradition, teaching, and inherited systems. And this is another essential developmental transition, because sooner or later we have to distinguish between the rules we've been given and the values we consciously choose to live by. So the Emperor is far more than a card of authority, leadership, or control. He represents the developmental capacity to create structure strong enough to support the life that you choose. At his healthiest, the Emperor gives us grounded authority, clear boundaries, and self-command. Blocked, he has weak boundaries, lack of structure, and collapses under responsibility. And in shadow, structure hardens into control, rigidity, domination, and harshness. His invitation is not to control more. It's to take responsibility for what is yours to hold, create boundaries around what matters, and build structures capable of supporting the life you actually want to live. Because nourishment without structure eventually disperses. Potential without structure remains only potential. And freedom without enough structure can quietly become chaos. If this deeper approach to the Major Arcana resonates with you, then do please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow and reach more people. And because we're working sequentially through all 22 archetypes as living pathways of personal, emotional, and spiritual development, it'll ensure you don't miss all that's still to come. In our next episode, we move into the Hierophant, where structure becomes connected to belief, tradition, teaching, values, and the systems of meaning that we've inherited from the world around us. For now, I'll leave you with one more question. Where in your life do you need more structure, and where might a flawed structure have started to harden into over-control? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video for the Hierophant.